Or to put it in different words, you remember where it says in Bereshit, it says, Loi toiv heyot ha'adam levado. Yes? What does it mean? Why was he saying this? Why did God say this? Because that's why he created the world. It's not good to be yachid, even when you're perfect. So when a person thinks, when I become perfect, I'm not going to need anybody. The more perfect I become, the less I need you, because I'm perfect. That's not the way God is. Because God was perfect and is perfect, that's why he wants someone else besides him, so that they can become echad. You hear this? God is actually saying, by creating the world, God is saying, I am not satisfied being me, I also want to have you. Now, somebody asked recently, isn't it selfish of God to create the whole world so that everybody will serve him? Doesn't that sound a little selfish? Huh? Yep. And then he tells us to never be selfish and never be arrogant. Isn't he being selfish and arrogant? Yes. Everybody serve me. Everybody praise me. It's the exact opposite. By creating the world, God is showing, I'm not enough. I'm perfect. But that's not good enough. Why? Because it's just me. So what does he do when he creates the world? He creates someone besides him. That's the opposite of arrogance. And that's the opposite of selfish. I'm already perfect. I don't need any favors from you, and yet I make room for you in my life. Why? So that you'll also exist with me, that I won't be alone. That's why we get married, because to be alone is not the godly way. God was alone, and he didn't like it. It's not enough. To be yourself, there has to be someone else also. Yes?
If you need someone with him, why do you create a lot of people and not just one? If he has one, he has someone with him. And that person needs someone. They're with each other.
Huh?
He's saying one person. Just create one person, and then Hashem will have someone serve him.
That's why it says that Adam was created alone, to tell you that even if there was only one other person, it would justify the whole creation.
Why doesn't he stay that way?
So why doesn't he stay that way? Because Adam ate from the wrong tree. Everything by God is huge. So he wants not only one person, he wants one people. Am Yisrael. So the question is, if you need Am Yisrael, why do you have to have non-Jews? You know what it's like? When you get married, it's just you and your wife. Totally private. And yet look what's going on upstairs. Right. A man and a woman are getting married, and the whole town is here. Who invited everybody? Only 2 people are getting married. What everybody else doing here? Uh-huh. They came to celebrate. For some reason, in order for the marriage to be perfect, the whole community has to celebrate, even though they're not getting married. So the same way, the relationship that we have with Hashem is like a marriage. All the other nations are like the guests at the wedding. So until now, can you imagine if all the guests upstairs are jealous? They're jealous. They want to get married to this kala or this chatan. Imagine how nasty that would be. Everybody making comments like, what are you marrying him for? What do you think, he's so special? I know. Oh, no, he's not so good. That's anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has been around forever because they're like guests at our wedding and they're all jealous. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? They're going to become intelligent. You come to somebody's wedding, you don't come to be jealous. You celebrate that they are having a special relationship. That's what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. Instead of being anti-Semitic, they will become guests at our wedding and they will be happy for us that we have this special relationship with Hashem, and they will bring presents like the people upstairs are doing, and they will actually be complimented that they were invited to such a special event. They could. They're not going to. They're not going to. Only certain people are meant to convert. Otherwise, they can't. Huh?
What about their wedding?
Huh?
What about their wedding? Their wedding.
Not with Hashem. Right? They know that we have a special relationship with Hashem. Until now, they've been jealous. Now they're going to become a little more mature, and they're going to say, wow, you guys really have something special. Can we come to the party? And if we're invited to the party, that's our honor. A little bit that's happening already. Like Yerushalayim becoming the capital again. Because people are saying, yes, they have something special. They are the chosen people. Why are we being jealous? So that's what the Navi says. The Navi says that every nation will come to contribute something to build the Beit HaMikdash. Like guests coming to a wedding. So what's happening upstairs is the solution to anti-Semitism. That's how it's going to all resolve itself. So, Ivdu es Hashem means you're doing for him what he needs. What does he need? Tefillin, Shabbat, Kashrut. What does he really need? He needs us to be echad with him. How do we become one with him? He keeps Shabbat, we keep it with him. He puts on tefillin, for real, we put on tefillin. That way we are with him. But imagine if you're sitting by the table on Shabbat and you're celebrating Shabbat and your children don't want to come to the table. They're still your children, but they're not echad with you. They're fighting with you. So the mitzvot that God gives us is so that we will become echad with him. And that's what he wants. He wants echad. And that's why before we do any mitzvah, we first have to know Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I think the party is starting. Wow, that was a short party. Any questions? Any answers? No questions? What happens if a person sins and then he dies? What happens to him?
He dies.
So what happens? Because he sinned. Huh? He has a judgment, and if he's guilty,
Downstairs.
downstairs, in the basement. Uh-huh.
Why do we refer to Hashem as he and not it? Or she? I know why not she.
Well, why not she?
Why not she?
I mean, Shekhinah is.
Shekhinah is a she.
I know. But kids is if Hashem is an Tziut, then it's it, not a he.
It's. I think you're following the theme. If he wants a relationship, then he's not an it anymore. An it doesn't want a relationship. A he and a she need each other. So the question is, should he be a he or a she? So the problem is not what he is, but what we are. Because if Hashem is the she, then we have to be the he. That's not good. There was a big debate between some famous rabbi and the Christians back in the olden days. And the Christian asked the rabbi, how come in your Torah God is so punishing? He punishes and he's angry and he's... The answer was brilliant. The rabbi said, it's because we would rather that he does the punishing than that we should do the punishing. By you, your God doesn't punish, so you punish everybody. You make the Crusades and you make the Inquisitions and you torture people. Better leave it to him. Let him be the he, we want to be the she, right? Also because he married us, which is the masculine. He came to take us out of Mitzrayim. So what is this thing about Gehenna? Anybody know? What's Gehenna? A place for bad people.
Purgatory person.
Purgatory.
It's like a washing machine.
That's good.
Well, it's also a place to get fights first, then go to.
So it's a dry cleaner.
It depends on how bad.
If you have a stain on your shirt, you put it in the washing machine.
Depends how much cleaning you need.
Just throw it out.
There's a fire, there's hot water, it boils. What's going on over there? How do you boil a soul? How does a neshama get punished?
Send them downstairs.
Huh? The only way that a soul can suffer is from shame. So imagine a neshama comes to Shamayim, and all the other souls are there, and you don't remember how to be a soul because you're used to being a body. That's very embarrassing. It's like walking into a shul and you don't know when to stand, when to sit, when to turn around. So what is the punishment of the sin? The embarrassment. When the soul goes back to a world of souls and it doesn't fit in, it's very embarrassing. What happens when you get embarrassed? You burn. You burn with shame. Right? So, Gehenna is not a place. It's like heaven goes up and this will go down. There's no up or down. You have two souls side by side. One is in heaven because it knows how to be a soul. And the other one sitting right next to it is embarrassed. So he's in Gehenna. How long can you be embarrassed? Up to 12 months. Maximum. And that's why we say Kaddish for 11. Because we don't want to suggest that this guy needed the maximum. But on the other hand, maybe he did. So we say 11 months, not 12. But what is Gehenna? Gehenna simply means you're embarrassed. Heaven means you come back after 80, 90, 100 years on earth, you come back and you remember how to be a neshama. It's as if you never left. That's heaven. So, what is the shame, or what is the fear of going to Gehenna? The shame. But the shame for doing a sin, you don't have to wait until you get to Gehenna. If you're embarrassed by your sin, you're already cleaned. You've already burned it off. So we can do tshuva on earth, and then we don't have to go to Gehenna because we were already embarrassed. We were already ashamed. And the shame burns off the sin. So the worst thing is a person who does a sin and he's not ashamed. He has no shame, no busha. That means that he's lost his conscience. He is so insensitive, he's not even ashamed. And then something else has to embarrass him in order to get him to get cleaned up. But if we're embarrassed ourselves, we don't have to go to Gehenna.
Where does this notion come that Gehenna is downstairs? I mean, I know Korah, when he went under, they said that's the petach of Gehenna. But where does this notion come from?
Because we put everything into physical. So we say, holy is up, unholy is down. We don't mean physically up or down. We mean this is higher and this is lower. This is more and this is less, but not physically. Not physically. So there is no physical place where you can go visit on visiting day. I don't have to have visiting day in Gehenna. You think they have? I mean, if you have a relative there, can you go visit?
Pretty embarrassing.
Bring them some candy. I mean, something. Of course you can. You can be sitting right next to him. But you're not embarrassed, and he is. So he's in Gehenna, and you're not. So you can give him a candy. In other words, we don't have to wait for Gehenna to clean us. We can clean ourselves. That's the power of tshuva. And that's what this month coming up, the month of Elul, getting ready for Rosh Hashanah, it's a time when we can be embarrassed ourselves by what we did wrong, and we don't want to do it again next year. So we're getting ready for a Shana Tova. A better year than last year because no embarrassment.
Just 4 days after
Hi, welcome to Ivy's Kosher Kitchen. It's me and I'm back, and I've got a simple recipe for you. We're going simple, basic, something that's sort of an everyday thing, but if you kick it up, great for a holiday, okay? Before we begin anything, and I'll tell you what the recipe is, as always, let's say L'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, borei bli hagefen. Oh, always love, started to cook a little glass of wine. You may notice, by the way, I have another glass here of white as opposed to the red. I'm going to get to that a little bit later as to why I have a red and a white. We're going to start with a chicken. I have a beautiful chicken here. This is courtesy of our friends over at Cole Foods, a pastured chicken, not free range. One step better, it's pastured, which means it lives out in the pasture, enjoying life, eating nice things that they're supposed to eat, little buggies and stuff like that. All the stuff the chickens are meant to eat, this guy's eating. No growth hormones, no antibiotics, of course, and 100% natural. Anyway, we're going to do a simple but effective roasted chicken. First thing we're going to do is put the chicken up here, and I'm going to take my roasting pan. Now, a lot of people are going to say, that's not a roasting pan. That's just a baking pan, a baking dish. And you would be correct about that. That is a baking dish. But what a lot of people have these big fancy deals, you pay $100, $150 for this roasting pan that you use a couple times a year. You don't need to do that. There's other ways that are going to make it really great. The whole idea of a roasting pan, by the way, is that the bird sits up on a grate so that he can get underneath it, okay? So we're going to do the same thing here, but in a different way. You can see here, I've got a lot of root vegetables, some onions and carrots and some peppers and stuff like that. So we're going to just put these right on the bottom. Anyway, we're going to take our chicken, put it right in here, put our dirty dish in here. Now, I'm going to do all my seasoning and everything right here in my roasting tray, because that way anything that spills off stays in here. And that's a great thing, because when it stays in here, it flavors up all of the vegetables and everything else that we got going here, okay? That's the inside. Now we're going to truss it. Now there's so many different ways you can season chicken. Chicken's like a blank slate. It's like, there it is, a blank canvas. What am I going to do? Okay, so I told you we're doing elegant but simple, something that you would just come home from work, hey, I got a chicken, let me get this thing going. Going into a 400-degree oven, about a half an hour. Then I'm going to flip it, re-season just a slight bit. I'll show you that. It will be, for me, about a half hour, but for you, it should be just about right away. So let me get this in, and I'll see you in a minute. All right, look at this baby. It's been in about another half hour. Beautifully browned, beautiful skin. The one thing I'm going to do at the end here, it's done basically. And how do we know it's done, by the way? We take its temperature. I'm not going to tell you 400 degrees for this amount of time and this amount of poundage. Take your temperature. Instant read thermometer. Put it right here into the breast. Into the thigh. I got 185, which is more than done on a thigh. Put it right into the breast, right in the meat. You don't want to hit the bones. You want to just get into the meat. I got, look at that, 180. So it's good. You want to be up at 165, but it's always going to read a little bit higher coming out, just like this. We're done. I'm going to take a little bit of honey, though. We got a special honey from our friends over at Honey Ridge Farms. This is a honey creme blood orange. They have all these different infusions in the honey. Lemon, they've got lavender, they've got blackberry, they've even got a coconut. It's really, really good stuff. So that's going to give us just another layer of flavor and a little bit of layer of sweetness. All I'm going to do is just take and drizzle this honey right over the top of everything. I want to thank my friends over at Cold Foods for this beautiful pastured chicken, organic, beautiful all natural, no growth hormones, no antibiotics, living the life that all chickens dream about. In fact, that we kind of like to have too, without all the stress and all the stuff we have in our lives. That's that. And so it's really, really healthy for you. So until next time, enjoy, happy eating, and l'chaim.
Hi, we are going to speak about the Parsha, the next coming Parsha. It's also reunited with the beginning of the year, the Rosh Hashanah.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Yeah, hi, welcome to One People, One World. My name is Rabbi Yaakov David Cohen, and I'm here talking today as we're getting ready for Sukkot, the holiday when the Jewish people commemorate the leaving of Exodus of Egypt, how God protected the Jewish people in the desert. We build a sukkah, which is a hut, basically. And this year is very apropos that we talk about the idea of the UN and the idea of the 70 bulls. For this year, the GA, the General Assembly, coincides with the beginning of Sukkot, which in the times of the temple, when the temple stood, there was they offered every day. They started out with 8 bulls, and every day they decreased until they ended up the final day with 1 bull. And these sacrifices were for the 70 nations. The 70 nations represents the United Nations. And today, as the GA meets, and this year is actually a very special year, because it says that in the times of the temple, each nation came to the Beis Hamikdash, to the temple, to pay pilgrimage and respect to the Jewish people. And being that we're now at this time, we should realize that this is no coincidence, that the fact that the GA is meeting now. What exactly is the Jewish message to the world? The Torah's message is universal. For instance, Torah, it says that God looked into Torah and He created the world. So everything that exists in the world is an opportunity for Torah to utilize it for its potential. I'd like to talk about, for instance, this show is about unity and about the idea of each and every one of us, both men, women, and children, Jew and non-Jew, represents a light, and represents a way to bring light. Is just like a candle. Each candle has a unique opportunity to light another candle, and by that it means lighting up the world. And this is what the 70 bulls represents. The 70 nations, which is an idea of all nations. This represents the idea of unity, all coming together for the Beis Hamikdash, for the one and only God. What is the temple? What is the Beit HaMikdash? The Beit HaMikdash is basically a place where the light of it permeated the entire world. It explains that the windows of the Beit HaMikdash were actually wider on the outside and narrower on the inside, meaning it was meant, just like a lighthouse, to penetrate and to illuminate the world. Not that the light should come in, but rather the light should go out. This is what today, when we're living in a world where everyone is looking at Cosmopolitan, looking at the United Nations, what does it represent? Why is it here in New York? And the reason why it's here in New York is to bring about light. And in New York, we have the light of Torah more than any other place in the world. And as the Rebbe explained, that the reason why they established the United Nations headquarters here in New York is because of the idea of New York and the previous Rebbe being the center of the Torah. The Torah, like I say, is a lighthouse. It's called Torah, or it's called Light of Torah. And the Light of Torah represents the unique path, because light, there's an analogy for godliness as light. Let's examine what light is all about. Light, it doesn't create anything. However, it gives you a sense of perspective of what's what. For instance, if this room were to totally be black right now, we wouldn't know what to do. We wouldn't know, here's a table, here's a chair. So the idea of light represents a unique opportunity, a guidance for both physical and spiritual. Because the physical and the spiritual are not, it's not like the physical is divorced or totally separate from the spiritual. In Judaism, the physical and the spiritual are meshed together, and the physical act is actually a spiritual act, meaning that you find godliness in the very essence of mundane life, in the physical world. So God is expressed in everything you do, from the basics of making a living to taking care of your children, whatever it is, it's a godly act. But the idea of Torah gives you an idea, like we said, that the idea of light doesn't create anything. It gives you a perspective, it gives you a guidance. It's like a ship in the lighthouse, guiding you into port, telling you where to go, what to be careful of. Because each and every one of us have a struggle, meaning a daily struggle. And this is, we see it more and more today, how the world is becoming a very small and an island. And the dictators and the unity that is found is not going to be created by world leaders. The way world unity is going to be created is within each and every one of us. It's not going to be fought, not like in World War II, on the battlefields, on the beaches, in Normandy, etc. It's going to be fought with each and every one of us having the resolve and the courage and the guidance to do the right thing, and to know that each and every one of us has men, women, and children, Jew and non-Jew, all for every people around the world. Every single 8 billion of us have the opportunity to create that light. And the way we create it is we illuminate ourselves. By illuminating ourselves, meaning that we realize that there's a purpose in life. People are looking for meaning. The idea of this universal no-hide code, or UN in the United Nations, is a means for us to unite and to bridge together the Muslim culture, the Christian culture, the Buddhist culture, and by them looking at Torah as a light, like we say, Torah is called Torah Or, which means light. That in itself brings about unity within and unity without. As a child, they used to give us an analogy of here in the United Nations and in Washington, they're trying to put together a map of the world. And there's a famous story about a child, after session after session, resolution after resolution, they couldn't do it. Finally, a young child comes together, and in a matter of seconds, he puts together a map of the world. And the question is asked, how did you do it? He says, very simply, I put the two eyes, the nose, the mouth together, and by that, and on the flip side of a person was the map of the world. Meaning, we don't have to worry about the world. We have to worry about ourselves. When we come together, then the world automatically falls into place. When we find out that each and every action that we do, and that the 70 nations coming together in the United Nations has a purpose, a divine purpose, a purpose that will illuminate the world and bring peace and harmony and bring the light of Torah to the rest of the world. And this is why they're meeting on Sukkot, which again, Sukkot is a time when all nations in the time of the temple met and provided a pilgrimage and provided a spiritual beacon for the nations, for each and every nation. And every nation, by definition, it says on the Isaiah wall, which world leaders signed in 1992, that they signed a major, in January, I think it was January 31st, the world leaders, Russia and the United States, signed the nuclear treaty, an arms reduction. And this is very, very important that it happened over here in New York. It happened right at the Isaiah wall, which it says there'll come a time when this is the prophet Isaiah, who prophesied thousands of years ago, that there will come a time when swords, instruments of war, or today when you have guns, or planes, or tanks, will be transformed into plowsheds, meaning that the arms race will lead to an arms reduction, and ultimately utilizing those valuable resources to feed, to clothe, and to provide shelter for every man, woman, and child on this planet. And we see that that's already coming into fruition. And the whole idea of the United Nations is that each leader comes together in the United Nations and realizes that this is a potential, there's not only potentially, this could be done, this could be a reality. And it's up to each and every individual, both on the government level and both on the, as we're seeing more and more, on the grassroots level. Because at the end of the day, you can have all the money in your world, but at the end of the day, you can only sleep on one bed. The idea is each and every one of us has the ability today to transform the world, as we see more and more for good. We see it more and more on the internet, how people are coming together. There isn't a dictator that could hide their evil, because at the end of the day, information is traveling, and information is power. Just like light, which gives you the information of where to sit, it gives you that perspective. It's power. It's ability to know what to do and not be misled by darkness, and to think that if I made $1 million, or I made $1 billion, I'll be happy. The idea is each and every one of us to realize that, number one, there's a famous saying in Hebrew. The word ashir, which means a wealthy person, is made up of 4 letters: enayim, shinayim, yadayim, and agayim, which means enayim is eyes, teeth, feet, and hands. Meaning, if a person could see, he could eat, he has what to eat, he has where to sleep, he could walk, he's healthy. That is a wealthy person. A wealthy person means that someone who has what to eat, he has where to sleep, he's happy and content. And it says also that who is rich? One who is satisfied with his lot. Because at the end of the day, we can have billions of dollars, and if you always want more money, and another billion, another dollar, another this, you'll never be happy. So the idea here is to be content, to be happy with one's lot. Realize that Hashem, God, loves every single individual. Every individual matters. Every individual collectively, we all are part of the master plan. The master plan, like I said, is that each and every one of us adds that light, illuminates, as it says, Hallelu es Hashem kol goyim, shabchu kol omim ki gova leinu chazeh, which translates as, it's a pasuk in Psalms, chapter 117, and it translates that all nations will come to praise God. And this we see more and more happening when the world is coming to becoming a global village. We see that the idea that we all share in that great masterpiece that God created every individual, and it's all ultimately, when redemption comes, we'll see this on a global scale. We won't see the evil as we see it today. We'll see only the good. Today, the challenge is to choose the right and not to be misled by the darkness and the evil, and to realize that that's just that. It's just a challenge to be overcome. It's just an obstacle, a darkness, to be able to see your way through the darkness and Every day God gives us tests and He challenges us. But it's only to make us stronger and to be able to rise up and to become better people and to realize that we all have the ability to make that difference. So I want to share with you that today, as we come together and the United Nations meets in the Great Assembly, the General Assembly I should say, in the Jihei Hall, where all nations will be represented by the head of state, that we share this universal message, this universal peace, and realize that universal peace is achievable and is ability, because if every nation comes together, they see that here in New York City, which is an island basically, we're made up of every nation over here living here, and essentially we all live in the same, more or less in the same area, and we live in an island. And just like we've made it here in New York, meaning all countries, whether you come from Pakistan or you come from Afghanistan or you come from Texas or Brooklyn, wherever you come from, you feel this is your home, this island. So too the great island of the universe, which is really an island when you think about it. Of course, every one of us is living on an island. We're all surrounded by water, and we're all here in a limited time. Meaning, the infinite God, which is God. How does God, who's infinity, create a finite? And why does He create a finite? He wants us finite people, who are not perfect, who are not angels, but He wants us every day to come up and to do the right thing and to bring about that universal light and universal peace. And universal peace comes about by us universally accepting ourselves as a means, as it says that the micro and the macro are all the same, meaning that the macro, the world that we live in, the world, there's an expression or saying that God looked into the Torah and He created the world. The Torah represents light and represents a way to live by. It's a guidebook. It's a universal message and for all people. That doesn't mean everyone has to become Jewish, or everyone has to be certain, or men have to be women, and women have to be men. Each and every one of us have our unique tasks. That's the way God created the world. He created the world that men should be men, women should be women, children have to learn to respect their parents, because at the end of the day, white hairs cannot be bought. Someone who's lived through wars, who's lived through hardships, and wakes up and knows how to deal with the world, these are people we have to cherish and respect, because at the end of the day, we're all finite. No one has lived forever. And we're all created in the divine image. As my book, I have a book titled Divine Image, now translated in Arabic, and it's all translated as well as in Chinese, Mandarin that is, Korean, French, Spanish, and so on. And this divine image that each and every one of us represents or possesses a unique light. A divine image means divine is light. Light illuminates the world. And we have the ability to illuminate the world, each and every one of us, in our unique tasks, in our specific tasks. Doesn't mean one is better or worse, like apples and oranges. Like today everyone wants to be, men want to be women, women want to be men. The idea is each and every one of us has to respect that that God created men in a unique way and gave them certain mitzvot, certain tasks to keep him. And He created women. And each one of us have a special role. So too God created the world and He created different cultures. Some of us are more intellectually, some of us more musical, some of us more emotional, but all these things, different attributes, all come together as a symphony, a great symphony. And the symphony is that of all of us, the whole universe coming together as one, as this show represents, not one people, one world under God, which is really about bringing together nations of the world, uniting the world under the banner of of the universal code, under the banner of peace, under the banner of love, under the banner of unity and cure, which is basically bringing a cure to the world. How do we bring a cure? Cure represents communication, respect, that we have to communicate with each other, respect each other, understanding, respect, and education. When we have these ideas that we understand each other, we communicate with each other, we respect each other, and we educate, we feel we become educated by each other, meaning each and every one of us. Someone could say, well, I'm very intellectual, how could I learn from someone who's emotionally? The answer is, even King David was able to learn from a fool. Everyone has something to share. And sometimes, if you can learn in the positive, just by learning, it says that sometimes, which means there's a great advantage from light by having the contrast of darkness, and there's also a great advantage of having a fool of wisdom when seeing a fool. So even if sometimes you say, how can I learn from a fool? Number one, even negative, even learning by what not to do is also learning. But even I think it says it says in Ethics of Our Fathers that every person has something to share. Every individual has unique something to share, and each one of us should share the light. Whether it's someone who's more intellectual, should look at someone who's emotional, and the world is made up of all sorts of people, all sorts of colors, and all sorts of shapes and sizes. The idea is that we all come together as one, as we say again, Hallelu es Hashem kol goyim shabchu kol olam ki gova aleinu chazdeh, which means that this nations of the world will come together and unite under the banner of Torah and under the banner of light. And this is happening right now as we speak in the United Nations and the special Jewish holiday of Sukkot, which represents the coming together, the bringing together in the actual four species on the particular level represents four different types of Jews. The esrog, which is the citrus, represents a Jew who has both Torah and mitzvahs. You have the lulav and the willow and the myrtle. Each one has unique. One has taste and no smell. One has smell and no taste, and one has neither. But all come together. They all have to unite to create the four species. In order to make the blessing, you cannot make the blessing on just a Jew that's perfect. You have to unite with a non-Jew, with a Jew who doesn't have anything. So it shows you that unity is about coming together, community is about unity, about seeing all people coming together as one, and ultimately bringing about universal peace. Because peace means shalom, which means complete. Complete means that we realize that there's a bigger picture, that even the challenges is part of the challenges and the hurdles is also part of even the downfalls and the setbacks that one has to overcome on a daily basis is sometimes only there as a springboard for growth, as a springboard for further unity and further acceleration and so on. So I want to share with you this universal message as we come into the holiday of Sukkot, and the Sukkot is also a time when we commemorate the Exodus of Egypt. But that Exodus of Egypt happens every single day. Every single day we're required to look out of going out of Egypt. What does it mean, Egypt? It doesn't mean just the country, Egypt, even though we left that many years ago and we never went back. But Egypt, Mitzrayim, means the constraints. There's a comfort zone which we all operate in. And the idea is to go out of that comfort zone and to challenge ourselves to be better people and to look at the bigger picture and to realize that yes, I could do it. Yes, that this is something which we have the ability to overcome. We have the ability to overcome the challenges. we have the ability to go out of that, our limitations, our challenges that was yesterday, and to overcome it and to rise above and to reach new heights. And the greatness of yesterday, or the accomplishments of yesterday, was yesterday. Today we have to grow. Every day it says that the difference between spirituality and physical, or is by physical, everything that's in spiritual, when you have in physical, it's a negative. I'll explain to you. For instance, someone who's happy with his lot, in physical, that's the way it should be. It's a positive. Whereas in spiritual, if you're happy with your lot, with what you've achieved yesterday, that's no good. Today we have to reach new goals. Today we have to climb higher. Yesterday we did one good deed, today we have to try to do 2 good deeds. Whereas if yesterday we're happy with what we have what our basic needs, we should be happy and thank God for everything in the physical. In the spiritual, we have to always increase and always look for new heights and new challenges and so on. So the idea is that we all come together as one, and we realize that the peace that the United Nations, which meeting here again to promote peace, and ultimately peace is achievable. If every single country could come to New York and go back, they should go back with this universal message of the universal Nohai, the UN and the UN, to promote the universal message of peace, of unity, and ultimately we will all share under that great banner, under that great prophecy. We will all realize that great prophecy when the redemption comes, where it says, where Isaiah prophesies that a time will come when swords, instruments of war, will be transformed into plowshares, instruments to provide man's sustenance, meaning instruments where people have what to eat. And today's technology, we all know that the technology is there. The ability is there to feed every single child. The ability is there that there shouldn't be any more wars. The ability, and we just have to realize that we could do it, and coming together as one. As it says, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, God is our Lord, the Lord is one. And it says one. Why does it say one and not unity? Because that God wants us to take this diversity, this united, meaning United Nations, we're having 70 or 196 different nations. He wants them to come together as one, to be echad, to become one. Because God had unity before He created the world. He wants the disunity, the fractions, to come together and to recognize the one God. For us to have unity, we need echad, Hashem, the one and only. For God to have unity, He needs all of us, every single child, every single woman, every single man, from the 8 billion people that exist on this world, to come together as one. And for this I say Shalom and Yom Tov, and we should have Hashem Echad, U'Shmo Echad, and we should see the ultimate redemption. When united we are, divided we fall, and we see the ultimate redemption, which is the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, standing and sharing its light for all to come and appreciate God. Thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to correspond to me. It's Rabbi Cohen at nohide.org. It's RABBYICOHEN, Rabbi Cohen at nohide.org. Thank you and God bless.
A story for Sukkot, and it really happened over 40 years ago, and it was when Elaine and I were first married. And so for the first time I had to make a sukkah for ourselves. And I really didn't know how. First of all, at school, every single year I came bottom in the class at woodwork. changing a light bulb was the outer limit of my practical ability. Secondly, we didn't have a car, so I had no idea how to get the materials and bring them back home. But then a friend said to me, well, I'm going tomorrow to buy some materials for the sukkah. Would you like to come with me? We can buy them together. So I said yes, and the next morning I went round to him. Well, he showed me his plans. He had actually drawn up the most elaborate architectural drawings for a sukkah fit for royalty. It was the kind of sukkah grand with a fine door and windows and all sorts of things that you would be really quite happy to spend 40 years in the wilderness, and you could, as I say, entertain royalty in it. And as I say, I had no idea what to do or how to make the thing. But we went off in his car and we went to the timber yard. When we got there, he took out of his pocket a long list of precise specifications of beams and planks and hinges and screws and goodness knows what. And I really had no idea, so I ordered a few big sheets of hardboard and a few planks and a bag of nails, and that was it. We put them all in his car, we came back to our respective homes and started hammering away. The next day we visited one another to see our respective handiwork. He had indeed done a palace of a sukkah. It was grand, it was self-standing, and it was magnificent. And mine was just 3 walls of hardboard nailed together and leaning against the house. It looked like a great big cardboard box and very ungainly. But never mind, at least it satisfied the halachic requirements, and we went into Yom Tov and duly celebrated. The second night of Sukkot, there was an almighty storm and a very intense hurricane force wind. And the next morning I came into shul and he was looking very downcast. What's the matter? I said to him. My sukkah, he said, in the storm last night it blew down. Yours did too, I suppose. And with a self-deprecating smile, I said, no, actually, mine's still standing. I don't believe it, he said. I've got to come round and see. So after shul, he came back to our house and looked at our sukkah. And there it was, still standing, and he wanted to know why. And he looked carefully, and he found the answer. Because it was so unstable, I had fixed it to the house with a single nail. And that nail kept it standing upright. He paused for a moment, and then he turned to me, and he said this. He said, now I suddenly understand what Sukkot is all about. He said, you can plan a sukkah, you can plan a building, you can plan a life, down to the utmost detail, and it can be a magnificent plan. But if a wind comes, it can blow your plans away. Whereas yours, which was very rough and ready, is joined to something solid, to the wall of your house. And even if there's only one nail joining you to something solid and immovable, all the winds in the world won't blow you away. And then he looked carefully at the nail and turned to me with a smile. Friends, Sukkot, I want to share with you a journey, a long journey actually, but not a difficult one, but a really, really revelatory one as to the nature of Sukkot. And I hope you'll be able to, I'm going to go at speed. You see, we have a lot of Makorot. But I hope we'll see something really quite new. And let me share, therefore, with you the following preparatory questions. Number one, what actually is Sukkot? Right? There is only one point in the whole of the Torah, you'll see it there in source 1, which actually tells you what Sukkot is all about, right? B'Sukkot Teshvu, can you see it? Shivat Yamim, live in a sukkah for 7 days, Kol Ezrach b'Yisrael Yeshvu b'Sukkot. Everyone born in Israel must sit in a sukkah, Laman Yedu Dorotechem, so that your generations shall know, Ki b'Sukkot Hoshavti et B'nai Yisrael, that I made the Israelites live in Sukkot, B'Otzi otam eretz Mitzrayim, when I took them out of the land of Egypt, I am the Lord your God. Now tell me, what is a sukkah? What does it symbolize? And on this, we know a famous rabbinic disagreement. You will find it in two versions in sources 2 and 3. I'll just read you the more famous one from the Babylonian Talmud. Ditanya, Ki b'Sukkot shavti et b'nei Israel, ananei kavod hayu divrei Rabbi Eliezer. The Sukkot represent the clouds of glory that protected the Israelites for 40 years as they wandered through the wilderness. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. That is the view of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva says, Sukkot mamash asu lahem. Actually, a sukkah is a sukkah is a sukkah. It's just literally a sukkah. That's what the Israelites lived in, and that's what it symbolizes. If you look at source 3, you'll find the same disagreement, but Mukhlefet Hashita, it's Rabbi Eliezer who says Sukkot Mamash, and Rabbi Akiva who says there were clouds of glory. Now, let me ask you a simple question. According to Rabbi Akiva, what was the miracle of Sukkot? They lived in a shed, okay? That's what Bedouin do today. We celebrate a miracle on Pesach. God took us out of Egypt from slavery to freedom. We celebrate a miracle on Shavuos. For the only time in history, God revealed himself to an entire people. What is the miracle of a garden shed unless it's me putting it up? So according to Rabbi Akiva, who said Sukkot is Sukkot Mamash, just a sukkah, what are we celebrating? That is a serious question. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that a sukkah represents the clouds of glory, if the sukkah really did represent the clouds of glory, what should it have said in the book, in the verse? Ki be'anan, in a cloud I led the Israelites through Egypt. That's what it says all the way through. Can you see source 4? Vayama Hashem al Moshe daber al Aaron achicha vayavo, etc., etc. Keep be'anan ere al hakaporet. I will appear in a cloud above the mercy seat. Or source 5, chas ha'anan et ohel moed. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the Mishkan. When the Torah wants to refer to a cloud, it refers to a cloud. Why call a cloud a sukkah? Nowhere in the whole of Torah, in the whole of Tanakh, is a cloud called a sukkah. So we have a question according to Rabbi Akiva, we have a question according to Rabbi Eliezer. Okay? Number 1. Number 2, tell me something. Where in the Torah does it say the Israelites lived in Sukkot for 40 years in the wilderness? The answer, nowhere, except here. Actually, did they live in Sukkot? What did they live in? They lived in tents. You remember, I mean, the most famous of them all, source 6. There's Bilam looking out over the camp. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkanosecha Yisrael. They lived in tents. They didn't live in sukkahs. A tent doesn't have a roof. You can't fulfill Sukkot by living in a tent. Okay? So how come, if it's to remind us of the Israelites in the wilderness, it tells us that they lived in Sukkot, and they nowhere else does it say they lived in Sukkot. Nowhere in the whole of Tanakh. Okay? Question number 2. Question number 3. Tell me, what is the other name for Sukkot? What do we call it? Zman Simchatenu, the festival of our joy. And the reason we call it the festival of our joy is there in 7 and 8. You'll see I put them in boldface and underlined, right? It says 3 times. How many times is Simcha mentioned in the Torah in connection with Pesach? Anyone know? 0. How many times is Simcha mentioned in connection with Shavuos? 1. How many times is it mentioned in connection with Sukkot? 3 times. Can you see? Source 7, Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem. That's in Parshas Emor. And in Devarim it says, V'samachta b'chagecha and Vayita Achsamer. That is all about Sukkot. Sukkot is called Zman Simchatenu because Simcha is mentioned 3 times in relation to Sukkot, once in relation to Shavuos, no times in relation to Pesach. Tell me, if you were to ask, and you didn't know any of this, which is the most joyous of the festivals, which would you have chosen? What? Well, Pesach, you get liberated from slavery to freedom. On that you can rejoice. Allow me to give you full permission to rejoice. I would have chosen Pesach. Or God comes down from heaven and speaks to you Personally, on that I would rejoice. God forces you to live 40 years in a shed without a proper roof. On that you rejoice. Are you with me? Question 3. Why call it Zman Simchatenu? Okay, now, that's 3 questions. Question 4. If you were to choose a book out of all the Torah to read on Sukkot, which would you choose? Or maybe, let me put it the other way around. Which is the one you wouldn't choose? Kohelet, right? It's the most miserable book in the whole of Tanakh. Well, how does it begin? There it is, source 9. Havel havalim amar Kohelet, havel havalim, hakol havel. Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. It's meaningless, right? That cheer you up? Are you with me? Of all the books in the Torah, you shouldn't choose. It's Kohelet, okay? And what do we choose? Kohelet. That's question number 4. Now, I am going to ask you question number 5. And question number 5 will turn out to be the key that unlocks a whole series of extraordinary discoveries. Who wrote Kohelet? Shlomo Melech, right? Okay, let's have a look. Can you see source 12? The opening line of Kohelet, right? Divrei Kohelet, Ben David, Melech Birushalayim. Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Who is that? It's Solomon. Only Solomon fits that description. Only Solomon was the son of David who ruled. Only Solomon was the one who accumulated all that wealth described. I built houses and gardens and made a fortune in real estate and all the rest of it. I was wiser than anyone else. That's Solomon, right? Does the word Solomon appear in Kohelet? No. Right. Now let me ask you, what other books did Solomon write according to tradition? What? Shir Hashirim and Mishlei. Okay? Does it mention King Solomon in Shir Hashirim and Mishlei? Have a look. In source 10, the opening line of Mishlei. Mishlei Shlomo ben David Melech Israel. Doesn't leave you in much doubt. In case you forgot it by the time you get through, it repeats it 5 times in Mishlei. Kohelet, Shir Hashirim, have a look in source 10. Source 11, Shir Hashirim, Tzena Ureena Benot Zion, B'melech Shlomo, B'atara she'itra lo imo b'yom chatunato b'yom simchat libo. Come out, daughters of Jerusalem, and look at King Solomon with a crown which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding and the day of his rejoicing. On Mishlei, it tells you King Solomon. In Shir Hashirim, it tells you King Solomon. Does the word Solomon appear in Kohelet? No. Now this is peculiar. We all know it's the words of Solomon. Whether Solomon wrote it or somebody else wrote it and attributed it to him, or somebody else wrote it and about him, whatever it was, whether it was a biography, an autobiography, a ghosted autobiography, doesn't matter. We know it means Shlomo. Why call it Kohelet? A word that appears nowhere else in the whole of Tanakh. Are you with me? Why? Now this can only be one thing. If my way of reading Tanakh in general makes sense, I have argued, for instance, in my book, Not in God's Name, that very often in Torah and Tanakh, you will find beneath the surface meaning a concealed counter-narrative. There is a story beneath the story. But we always find a clue somewhere to tell us that there's more here than meets the eye. And this word, Kohelet, is such a clue. And what clue is it giving? Well, I'll tell you, a word very similar to Kohelet appears in the Torah. Near the end, anyone know where? There's a mitzvah, which is almost the same word. The mitzvah is called Hakhel. It's the same word, kahal, right? Means a community, kehillah. The 612th command is Hakhel, 612 out of 613. Tell me something. There it is, command in source 13. Have you got it? When did Hakhel take place?
Sukkot, right? It says in source 13, Vayetzav Moshe otam lemor, and Moses commanded them, saying, Miketz sheva shanim b'moed, shnat hashmita, b'chag hasukot. On Sukkot, at the end of a Shemitah year, the king is to assemble everyone in Jerusalem and teach Torah to them. That is incidentally what Koheles does. He is makil, right at the end, he taught people Torah, and many of the commentators say that's why it was called Koheles, because this is what he taught at Hakel. But here is a connection between Kohelet and Sukkot. Second question, what is Solomon famous for? Apart from having a lot of wives and a lot of money and an awful lot of horses. He built the temple. When did he inaugurate the temple? What? In other words, the celebrations began a little before Sukkot. They went on through Sukkot, and B'yom HaShmini, on Shmini Atzeret, he gave people the chance to go back. Right? Have a look. Here it is. Source 14. Az, what's that word? Yakel Shlomo. This is Kings 1, chapter 8. That's chapter which tells the story of King Solomon consecrating the temple. Then Shlomo assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the princes of the, etc., etc. Vayikalu Melech Shlomo Kol Yisrael B'Yerech HaEtanim B'Chag Hu HaChodesh HaShvi'i. On the festival of the 7th month, and the festival, the thing called Chag, in the 7th month is Sukkot. If you have a look, do you know how the Torah signifies a key word? It repeats it. How many times? Well, how many times does the word good appear in the first chapter of Bereshit? Well, how many days have we got here? 7. If you see a 7-fold repetition of a word, you know it's significant. When you go back home, have a look at 1 Kings chapter 8, and you will see it has the root kahal, vayakel, 7 times. So we've got another connection with Sukkot, and indeed with Jerusalem. Yeah? Now, there's a parasha which has that word as well, isn't there? Which parasha is it? Vayakel, right? There it is, source 15. Vayakel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Israel v'yomer. What does he do in Vayakel? Tells them to build a Mishkan. Tell me, when did they start building the Mishkan? Anyone remember when Vayakel is told? The day after Yom Kippur. And you will see that they gave the gifts for it for 2 days, right? So count that. 11th of Tishrei, 2 days for the bringing of gifts, 12 and 13. When did they start building? Erev Sukkot. Yeah? So we have 3 connections between the word kahal, kohelet, and Sukkot. Now this is extraordinary. Which is the earliest connection between a festival and a Megillah? Well, which Megillah is referred to in the Mishnah and Talmudic tractate called Megillah? Purim, right? Purim, because we wouldn't have a Purim without Megillah Esther. So the earliest is probably Esther and Purim. Undoubtedly, there is an ancient connection between Eicha and Tisha B'Av. Eicha is clearly written for a moment of lamenting. So the connection historically between Kohelet and Sukkot is probably no earlier than the period of the Gaonim, 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. And yet, already when Kohelet was written, the author of Kohelet included a code word right at the beginning that points us to 3 texts, all of which have to do with Sukkot. Are you with me so far? Here is the key to the mystery. What Kohelet is telling us is that Sukkot is a commentary on Kohelet, and Kohelet is a commentary on Sukkot. As soon as you understand that, then you are going to see things you never saw before. Okay? We are seeing this extraordinary thing that Chazal recognize. They call it sometimes in halachic context, Gzera Shava. Nowadays, the posh word is intertextuality. There it is, a beautiful piece of intertextuality. In 3 different ways, Kohelet is referring to Sukkot. And that is the end of the first part of the journey. This is a 3-part journey, okay? Part 2. What is the theme of Kohelet? Well, let me ask you, what is the key word of Kohelet? What? Hevel, right? I mean, you can hardly miss it. In line 2, how many times does it appear? You see it in source 9, count them up. How many times? 5 times, right? Havel, Havalim, Amar Kohelet, Havel, Havalim, Hakol, Havel. 5 times. It appears 38 times in this tiny little book on its own, right? So now tell me, what does Hevel mean? Vanity. Do we have any advance on vanity? What? What? No. Hevel. Hevel with a hey. I'll tell you what the translations translated as: meaningless, empty, pointless, vanity, purposeless, futile, right? All of which are wrong. You will see in the Green Siddur. Sorry, I have to tell you a little story here. Does any of you remember there was a year, it must be 8 years ago, when they put on this huge exhibition in New York? They had cows everywhere, wooden cows. Were any of you in New York when they had these wooden statues of cows everywhere? Yeah? Do you remember this? Years and years ago? The day I was inducted into the House of Lords, we brought along a sandwich lunch before the induction. And where do you go to eat a sandwich in the House of Lords? It was a little garden that belonged to Black Rod. It's just, on the Thames, a little private garden. So we go in the garden and have a little sandwich, a Mazzone sandwich, in the garden of the House of Lords. And lo and behold, what do we see? We see one of these New York cows wearing ermine robes, the robes of a member of the House of Lords. I said to Elaine, I have just heard Hashem whisper to me, Umota ha'adam min ha'be'ema ayin ki hakol havel. The preeminence of man over the beast is nothing because all is vanity, okay? So I was put in my place. Think you're important to be in the House of Lords. Hashem reminds you, no, we're all just mortal, and etc., etc. So, because that line appears very early on in our morning prayers, yeah? I had to translate it for the Green Siddur. And I had to give it the correct translation. And here is the correct translation. In Hebrew, and not only in Hebrew, in ancient Greek, and I'm sure in whatever language Hindus speak. Actually, what language do Hindus speak? I don't know. Whatever they speak. Anyway, you will find that the words for soul in Judaism all have to do with breathing. Yeah? Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Vayinafash, to breathe deeply. Ruach is a wind or a gust of air. Neshiman, linshom, to inhale. Yeah? So all the words for soul in Hebrew, and Greek likewise, psyche and so on, they all have to do with breathing. And in Hinduism, and Zen Buddhism and so on, breathing is a very significant religious act. Hevel means a shallow breath. Or as I translated it in the Siddur back in 2005, a fleeting breath. And what Kohelet is saying is this. We may think that I'm the greatest king in the world, the richest man in the world. I built the temple. I've accumulated all this fame, this wisdom. In the end, we're all going to die. So what's it all mean? Hakol Havel means the whole of life is a mere breath. You can have everything. Lose breath, you're dead. That's finished. That's the end. Kohelet is the most sustained exploration of mortality in all of literature. You want to read another one? It's good. It's not as good as Kohelet, but it's very good. Is to read Tolstoy's Confessions. Tolstoy was induced into the same existential despair as Kohelet. And read those Confessions and you will see. You remember that moment, that incredibly moving moment at the end of King Lear, when he suddenly discovered that Cordelia, whom he thought was, the one who didn't like him, is the only one who really cared for him. And by the time he discovers it, she's dead. And he's holding her body. And he's saying, why should a dog, a horse, a rat have breath, and thou no breath at all? That is what Kohelet is saying. Everything we build up in our grandiose structures are nothing, because all we are is a mere fleeting breath. And we could die at any moment, and none of us will live forever. It is the most searching exploration of mortality known to me. Because we can accumulate huge wealth, but if we die, and we hand it on to our kids, who knows what they'll do with it? Is it good to give your kids wealth or not good? Who knows? If you have power and you die, who's going to take your place? Is he going to or she going to undo everything you fought for? You may have devoted your life to writing books. After I die, will anyone read them? Nothing has worth when we reckon the fact that we're not going to be here to see it. Now, I want to know, what did Kohelet do in this personal existential crisis? And here I have to introduce a couple of names to you. Some of them, one or other, may be familiar to you. Sigmund Freud had a brilliant disciple, an Ilui. I mean, I think in some ways as bright as Sigmund Freud himself. He was far and away Freud's most brilliant disciple. He was called Otto Rank. Does the name mean anything to you? His original name was, you guessed it, Rosenberg. But he changed it to Rank. Otto Rank was obsessed with this concept that much of human life is driven by anxiety at the fact that we're going to die. There's another Jewish guy whose name is significant here, and his name was Ernest Becker. Ernest Becker wrote a book published in 1973 called The Denial of Death, which introduced Otto Rank's ideas to the American public. The book was published in 1973. He won the Pulitzer Prize for it in 1974, and by the time he was awarded the prize, he was already dead. And he wrote this book, The Denial of Death. And what they both concluded is that fear of death leads people to do things that make them feel, I will live forever. One of those things is to accumulate great wealth and possessions. Another is to achieve great power. Another is to be very wise and write lots of books. Artistic creativity. All of this is a desire to leave something that will live on after you. The only trouble is that you won't be there to see it. And that is the theme of the opening 2 chapters of Kohelet, right? You'll see them. Can you see it's source 16, but you'll have to turn over the page, right? That's what he says. Asiti li ganot upardesim. I made for myself gardens and orchards. Asiti li brechot mayim, I made for myself pools of water, fountains. Kaniti avadim ushvachot, I acquired many servants. Kanasti li kesef v'zahav, I accumulated wealth and gold. All of these things are classic syndromes that Otto Rank and Ernest Becker write about. They're all attempts to defeat death, right? And all of them fail. So right after all of this, he comes back, Havel Havalim Hakol Havel. Now let me ask you a simple question. If Kohelet is all about death, who was the first human being to die? Who was the first human being to die? What? What? No. His number 2 son, in English, Abel, murdered by Cain, right? What is the Hebrew for Abel? Hevel, that is the word, right? And who was he killed by? Cain. And what does Cain come from? Have a look, source 18, right? It's there in front of you, source 18. V'adam yada et Chava ishto. Adam knew Eve, his wife, that is knowing, as they say in the biblical sense. Vatahar, and she became pregnant. Vateret et Cain, and she gave birth to Cain. Vatomer, kaniti ish et Hashem. I have acquired a child together with God. Kaniti, I have acquired. That's why she called him Cain. What did Solomon just say above there? So Zion? Kaniti, right? The word kaniti only appears 6 times in the whole of Tanakh. 3 of them in the book of Ruth. Okay? Kaniti. And now you understand the drama of Cain and Abel. Is this drama? You know, people say, everyone knows Cain and Abel is a symbolic story. They were real, but they represented something conceptual. People say it's the old conflict between the farmer and the herdsman. But, in fact, Cain and Abel are a metaphysical drama on death, life, the fragility of life, and the attempt to defeat death by acquisition. And that is the drama that Solomon goes through. He attempts to defeat death by kaniti, by acquiring things, and realizes it's all in vain, because those things will live on after me, but I won't. Right. Now, what is the halachic definition? Oh, sorry, what is the solution King Solomon comes up with in Kohelet? He eventually finds an answer. Does anyone know what it is? Pardon? No, I mean before the last verse. He gets there quite early on. Okay, I'm going to give you a clue. Tell me, the word simcha, right? Joy. The root samach, in some form or another. How many times does the word simcha appear in the book of Bereshit? Have a guess. 1. How many times in the book of Shmot? Have a guess. 1. How many times in the book of Vayikra? 1. How many times in the book of Bamidbar? 1. How many times in the book of Devarim? 12. Quite a lot, okay? We had some of them, yes, in Kitavo, right? V'samachta v'cholatov, tachad Hashem, lo avadata es Hashem elokecha b'simcha. Sorry, how many does that make up? I've lost count here. 16. How many times do you think the word simcha appears in Kohelet? 17. The book we think is the most miserable of the lot has more simcha in it than all 5 books of the Torah together. And that is the answer. And I have to tell you something. What is the Hebrew for happiness? Come on, it's the first word of the book of the Psalms. Ashrei. Ashrei, right? Ashrei kachalo. Ashrei yishvevetecha. Ashrei. Judaism is interested in happiness. It loves it. But what Judaism really cares about is simcha. What's the difference between happiness and joy? We have a wonderful philosopher in our midst, and I would say happiness is something philosophers aspire to, at least if they're Aristotle. Eudaimonia, okay? Happiness involves a life taken as a whole. Solon said, call no man happy until he's dead. In other words, it didn't mean you suddenly cheer up when you die. He meant judge a person by the whole of their life. Is simcha about a lifetime? No. Simcha is about now. Simcha lives in the moment. And that is why you can feel simcha, even in the midst of terrible, bad things happening. You ever been to an Israeli wedding when bad things are happening? I have to tell you, we were there during the Gulf War. We were there in 2002 when all the suicide bombings took place. You go to an Israeli wedding, then you will see the most magnificent simcha. Because simcha is not stepping back and saying, am I happy with life as a whole? Simcha lives in the moment. And that is why simcha is, William Blake saying, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Or what some rather best-selling Buddhist writer calls the power of now. That is what simcha is about. And so Solomon finally realized, I'm not going to defeat death by accumulating lots of property and wealth and wisdom and writing books, because that's life as a whole and we never live to see all of this. But I can defeat death by simcha, by rejoicing in the wife that I love, he says, by enjoying today and not worrying about tomorrow. Eat and drink because tomorrow we die. Live in the moment, he says, and have simcha. And that is how Kohelet finally conquered his obsession with death. He learned to rejoice. Don't worry about tomorrow. Just thank God for now. And that is what he did. Now, what is the halachic definition of a sukkah? Somebody must know this. What is it, the halachic definition of a sukkah? It is a dirat arai. It's a temporary dwelling, right? What obsesses King Solomon about the human body? It's a temporary dwelling. That is what obsesses him. It's not permanent. A human life is like a sukkah. It's not like a palace made of stone. It's a temporary dwelling. And what allows us to overcome our anxiety and insecurity, the fact that all we have is a temporary dwelling? Simcha. That is why Sukkot is Zman Simchatenu. And that is what Kohelet is telling us about Sukkot. Okay? And that, I think, is the end of part 2. Sukkot is about knowing that life is insecure. You know, we had a whole bunch of people who said, you can securitize risk. You remember that one? Subprime mortgages, all that stuff. You saw The Big Short? You know what I'm talking about. The truth is, you can't securitize risk. Life is a risk, and it is hazardous. And that robs you of all the joy, because you can never know, am I going to be here tomorrow? How do you deal with that? The answer is, v'samachta b'chagecha v'yitach samach. You sit in a rackety old building, open to the wind, the rain, the cold, and the storm, and you rejoice. That is how you solve Solomon's problem, and that is what Sukkot is all about. And that, I think, is the end of the second part of the journey. Now, I want to ask you a simple question. King Solomon built the temple. Was that a good thing or not a good thing? Well, it must have been a good thing. It was the greatest thing ever, right? Were there some downsides to it? Were there some downsides to building the temple? Okay, have a look at source 19, right? Here you are. The beginning of the story of the building of the temple, 1 Kings chapter 5. Can you see what it says? King Solomon conscripted laborers from all Israel, 30,000 men. He sent them off to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000 a month. So they spent 1 month in Lebanon, 2 months at home. Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hills, as well as 3,300 foremen who supervised. How many people did he have building the temple? Can you do your arithmetic? A lot, exactly so. Precisely so, 183,000 and some. Okay? Does that remind you of anything? When was the last time you heard about the Israelites being turned into a labor force? Correct. Hang on, we were supposed to leave Egypt, right? Solomon seems to have taken the people back into slavery. Now, have a look here at source 20, right? Can you see that? All the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, who were not of the people of Israel, these Solomon drafted to be slaves, and so they are to this day. But the people of Israel, Solomon, made no slaves. Can you read that? The Torah has to tell us King Solomon didn't make the Israelites slaves. That's quite striking, I think, is it not? Tell me, how long did it take? How long does it take to build a house in Hampstead Garden suburb? How long did it take Solomon to build the temple? Anyone know? Have a look. Source 21. In the 4th year, the foundation of the house of Lord was laid in the month of Ziv, and in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its parts according to all its specifications. He was 7 years in building it. It took him 7 years to build the temple, okay? Now look at the very next verse in Tanakh. Can you see it? Solomon was building his own house 13 years. Is that telling you something? He spent almost twice as long building his own palace as he spent building a house for God. So the temple was a wonderful, wonderful thing, the greatest thing ever, but it practically reduced the whole of the Israelites to slavery. So that the Torah has to tell us, well, he didn't actually make them into slaves, because at the end of 7 years they could go free. And he spent twice as long building a house for himself as he spent building a house for God. That is a bit of a critique here. Right? Now, do you remember what God said to David when David said, I've got to build a temple for God? Anyone know what God said? Have a look. Source 23, I've given it to you in the Hebrew and the English. We'll read it. In the English, Solomon says to the prophet Nathan, I want to build a house for God. Nathan says, that's a great idea, go ahead and do it. But then we read, but that night the word of the Lord came to Nathan. Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, would you build me a house to dwell in? I haven't lived in a house since the day I brought up the people from Egypt. To this day, I've been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. In all the places I've moved with the people of Israel. Did I speak a word about any of the judges of Israel whom I commanded to shepherd my people, saying, why haven't you built me a house of cedar? I don't want a house. I'm happy with a tent. So we see that there is an undercurrent here. It's not the primary meaning. The Beit HaMikdash was the holiest thing ever. But there's an undercurrent here. That God didn't want this kind of palace. That it would turn the Israelites into a corvée, a nation of slave laborers. That it would be like every other nation and every other nation in the ancient world, the modern world, and everything in between. You want to announce, I'm great? You build monumental buildings. Everyone did it. Every single nation there ever was. And God is saying to David, you think I'm like that? Did I ever ask for such a thing? I was happy with a tent. What was the name of that tent, by the way? It's called the Mishkan. Incidentally, how do English Bibles translate the word Mishkan? Anyone know? Tabernacle. That remind you of something? Are you with me? So, as house is to sukkah, so mikdash is to mishkan, as temple is to tabernacle. Right? Now, I asked you a simple question. Who lived in a sukkah in the Torah? The Israelites never. But what is the root of the word sukkah? Anyone know? What do we call the roof of a sukkah? Schach. The root of sukkah is schach. Does that word appear anywhere in the Torah? The answer is yes, it appears twice. In which context? Anyone know? In the Mishkan. Right? There it is. Source 24. Vahiu hakruvim. The cherubs. Above the Aron, right? The cherubs. Porsei knafayim lamala. They spread their hands over them. Sochachim bekanfehem al hakaporet. They were overshadowing, they were protecting, they were shadowing the kaporet. Ufnehem ish el achiv el kaporet. And they were the cherubs were facing one another. Right? So and that is in Parashas Truma, in which we have the command to build the Mishkan, and the same sentence appears, the same words appear in Parashas Vayakel when they actually made the sukkah. The only context in which schach appears in the Torah is in relation to the Mishkan. There is a place where, I'm not sure if it's the temple. I'm not sure if it's the temple. None of the commentators are sure in the temple. But does anyone know what harachamon we say in benching on Chol HaMoed Sukkot? Yakim lanu et Sukkot David Hanofalet, right? You will see that is a quote from Amos in source 26. Can you see it? Bayom hahu akim et Sukkot David Hanofalet. I will restore the sukkah of David that has fallen down. And remember what God said to David. I prefer living in a tent than a palace, than a house of cedar. Now I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Which of the patriarchs lived in a house? Did Abraham live in a house? No, he lived in a tent. Did Isaac live in a house? No, he lived in a tent. You know who lived in houses? Have a look, source 27. Bereshit 19, you remember, 2 angels come to Lot in Sodom. Vayomer hinei na Adonai sirana el beit avdechem. Lot lives in a house. Abraham lives in a tent. You know who else lives in a tent, in a house? Look at source 28. Vayomer bat mi'at hagidi na'ali hayesh beit avicha makom lanu lalun. Abraham's servant gone to find a wife for Isaac. Who lives in a house? Lavan. Okay, Lavan lives in a house. Lot lives in a house. Is that a good advertisement for a house? Not really. Okay, Abraham lives in a tent. Isaac lives in a tent. Who is the first patriarch who builds a house? Here is the verse. Can you see it? Source 29. Now listen. This has to be one of the strangest verses in the whole of the Torah. Listen carefully. Can you see it? Source 29. Yaakov nasa Sukkota. And Jacob traveled to Sukkot. Vayiven lo bayit. And he made for himself a house. The first patriarch to make for himself a house. Ulamiknehu asa Sukkot. But for his cattle, he made Sukkot. And he is about to celebrate the fact that he's the first patriarch to build a house. What do you think he's going to call the place? Beit something or other, right? Beit El, Beit Lechem, you name it. What does he call the place? Al Kain Kara Shem HaMakom Sukkot. There you are, you just bought a house in Hampstead Garden suburb and you name it after your garage. I mean, have you ever seen anything more extraordinary? And what is Jacob telling us for all time? Jews don't have to live in houses to feel secure. I'm happy to live in Sukkot. My animals live in Sukkot. I'm happy to live there. What does God say in Parshas Bahar? When you come to the land The land, you will never own it in perpetuity. Why? Ki li haaretz hi gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. You are mere strangers and temporary residents as far as I'm concerned. In other words, even though you live safely in the land of Israel, never forget where you came from. Never so settle down that you become complacent. V'ram levavacha v'shachachta, so that your heart is upraised and you forget where you came from and who you owe this to. Never forget, in the immortal words of the Beatles' last recording, get back to where you once belonged. So just as, even in Israel, they were supposed to remember the 40 years wandering in the desert, now you begin to see this extraordinary thing, that just as, even though they are worshipping in the temple Solomon built, don't forget how you first once had God living in your midst, in a sukkah, called the Mishkan, called the tabernacle. You do not need great buildings of cedar and stone to find God. You can live in a little Mishkan, a porter cabin, courtesy of IKEA, I have to tell you. And still God will be there. If, of course, you're like the Keruvim, whose face was Israel Re'ehu. You turn face to face to your human being. That is where the Shekhinah lives. You remember where the Keruvim were facing in Solomon's temple? They were not facing one another. They were facing Penehem El Abayit. They were facing the house. They weren't looking at each other. The Gemara in Baba Batra, Daf Tzadites Amud Aleph, says, when Israel do the will of God, the cherubs face each other. When they don't do the will of God, they face the Bayit. That is an extraordinary Gemara. It's telling us that the Mishkan was closer to what Hashem wanted than Solomon's temple. And what Sukkot is telling us is, Sukkot is when the Israelites went to the temple and celebrated the produce of the fields, and they thanked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but they never forgot when they came from. Because every time a nation forgets its youth, its childhood, the hard times they had when they were struggling to make it go, they become decadent and they eventually decline and fall. But Jews never are allowed to do that, because it's enough that you're Gerim and Toshavim, that you're temporary residents, and you're always asking me for another year of life. And it's enough. Don't think you've got a great big temple. I'm as good as the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians. I tell you, I'm good enough with a Mishkan. Because that is the Sukkah, that's the Schach. That memory of the Mishkan is good enough for me. And we now understand exactly the argument with which I began, which is Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. What is a sukkah? Rabbi Akiva is right. A sukkah was a sukkah mamash, not a hut the Israelites lived in, but the Mishkan, the portable temporary dwelling that God dwelled in. And Rabbi Eliezer was right when he said Ananei Kavod, because where were the Ananei Kavod? Do you think they covered the people? If you look in the Torah, you will see they covered the Mishkan. As long as they were encamped, the cloud was over the Mishkan. When it moved beyond the Mishkan, they knew it was time to travel on. The Mishkan was a temporary dwelling. But the odd thing is that the temple was a permanent dwelling, and yet it was destroyed twice, and we don't have it anymore. But the Mishkan, which could move anywhere because God is everywhere, became the symbol of the shul that you can build in Jerusalem, but also, not bad, in Hampstead Garden suburb. That became the permanent symbol. The temporary became permanent, and the permanent turned out only to be temporary. Ki besukot hoshavti et bnei Israel. When I brought them out of Egypt, it wasn't the Israelites who lived in a sukkah, it was God who lived in a sukkah. And the sukkah is telling us something.
This is a very special time of the year, Sukkot, and I would like to chat with you just for the next few minutes about the idea of
חג הסוכות הוא מסמל לנו תהליך מאוד פשוט ומאוד יפה, שאנחנו לוקחים פסולת גורן ויקב, דברים בזויים, בעצם אין בהם שום דבר, זורקים אותם, שורפים אותם, ומעלים אותם מעל הראש שלנו, כדבר הכי חשוב. מה זה פסולת גורן ויקב? מידת ההשפעה, מידת האהבה, מידת החיבור בינינו, וזה מה שחג הסוכות דורש מאיתנו. שאנחנו נעלה את החשיבות של חיבור ואהבה למעלה מראשינו, ויבנה סוכת שלום, וכל העולם ייכנס תחת הסכך הזה הגדול, וכולנו יחד נהיה כאגודה אחת. זה מה שמסמל לנו חג הסוכות. אז נזכה למצב שהוא באמת כולו סוכה גדולה, סוכת שלום. חג סוכות שמח.
Holiday of Sukkot, the time of our joy. And yet, interestingly enough, Vilna Gaon, one of the greatest sages of Jewish people, said that this is one of the most difficult holidays that there is. Why is that? Because it's the time of our happiness. Vilna Gaon says the Torah commands us to be happy, and we have to be happy for 7 days every second. So we can ask a question, how can Torah command us to be happy? That means we have to learn something about emotional states. But first, let's ask the question, what is this state of happiness? And again, our sages indicate as alike other states, for example, a joy, something that comes when we hear a good news, the state of happiness is a constant state. It's something that person should be, it's a state that the person should be in all the time. Now, the constant happiness can only be if we rely on something constant. And here we see logically that everything in this world is changing. Everything comes and goes except for one thing, is God, presence of God, God's love to us, God's care for us. So if we really can feel God's love, can really integrate it and feel it all the time, then we can really feel happy all the time. And that's what Chazanish, one of the greatest Jewish sages, says, that when you feel God's presence, when you focus on God's presence, you immediately feel this state of happiness. But again, you realize that this is not something that we experience immediately and all the time, like Vilna Gaon every second, but we can learn how to do it. And so how can we do it? The first of all is to change our attitude. What do I mean by change of attitude? Well, when we prepare for a greatest holiday, the whole year you wanted to go to some tropical island, and you're thinking about it, you're preparing it. So one of the attitudes that you take, that anything going to happen during my holiday is not going to bother me. So things normally that would annoy you or bother you, make you irritated, when it comes into holiday, you says, no. So wait a minute, this is my holiday. I'm not letting those things bother me. Whatever it's weather, whatever it's something happened, okay, we're going to talk to friends and say, we went to this beautiful island, and instead of this and this happened. So that becomes part of the adventure, if you wish. So that's the same thing is with Sukkot. Sukkot is a 7-day trip, if you wish, to the island of happiness. The 7th day into a very special spiritual island where we learn about happiness. So if we will change our attitude and we'll look at the holiday of Sukkot like this, then our whole week is going to be differently. We'll look at these things differently. We don't allow things to bother us because that's what God asks us to do. So that's one practical advice for preparation for the holiday of Sukkot. And another thing, that we have instruments that help us, and one of them is sukkah, is a temporary dwelling. What is the sukkah telling us? The sukkah telling us, leave materialism. Not material world, because the sukkah itself have to be built by our hands. We can't use nature for the sukkah, but the roof is open to the universe. So leaving the material world. Why? Because you see, if we attach our happiness to materiality, that between those things that we lost and we feel sorry for, the things we worry about losing and worrying about future, we never can be happy. Now, once we attach our happiness to, as I said, one constant presence of God and realizing that He loves us and this love is going to be infinite, then we can leave sort of things, the whole notion of materialism, and look with wonder and sometimes with great interest, how the material world is changing and what's happening in this material world that's constantly changing. Realizing that since it doesn't attach to our essence, and it's the only reason it's there is really to help us grow, to help us to become greater people, then our whole attitudes to what's happening in the material world is also changed. So our sages tell us that going back to the sukkah and sitting in the sukkah properly is going back to Gan Eden, going to the Garden of Eden. That's the energy of the sukkah. And because we are in the Garden of Eden, so the people who live in Garden of Eden, they come to visit us. And the first day is Abraham, the second day is Isaac and Yaakov and so on. So, but apart from just having them as a guest, you know that our forefathers represent the state of consciousness, the archetypes. Abraham.
We take this opportunity of wishing everyone a wonderful, good, happy, sweet New Year, coming now from the holiday of Yom Kippur and preparing ourselves for the holiday of Sukkot. Of course, what's in our mind is the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard shootings. We can't take life for granted. We're about to leave our solid homes on Sukkot to spend time outside, reminding us how vulnerable we each are. We're all on this earth for a certain amount of time, and sadly today 12 families in the Washington, D.C. area are mourning their loved ones. In the aftermath, let us mourn the victims and honor their memories. And so this evening, this Sukkot, let us look at life clearly and remember the important things in life. Let's be sure to turn the people who mean everything to us and tell them, I love you. From awe to joy. Let's begin by putting the Jewish calendar into perspective. We are currently in the 4 days of transitions between the days of awe, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the days of joy, Sukkot, that begins this week, tomorrow evening, Thursday and Friday, all the way through next week, concluding with Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. So we're going from days of awe now to days of joy. The first half of the month of Tishrei, which as the first month of the Hebrew calendar, really functions like a cosmic nervous system. It controls the rest of the year. It mandates that we allow ourselves, through the experience of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, to recognize God as so much greater than we are, our King, our Judge, the one known the absolute authority over our lives. That was Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Now, why is that not enough? Why can't we simply celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and that's it? Why do we now go into the holiday of Sukkot? Because what is missing is that experience in the element of closeness, of love, and more importantly, of integration. Let me explain. To use an example from nature, when we stand in awe of an ocean in a thunderstorm, we may feel inspired and uplifted. We are most likely relating it, though, from an awesome sight. We're looking at the ocean from a distance. Can't compare that to plunging in, immersing in the water. We cannot just stand there awestruck, afraid of the might of the ocean. We've got to get right into it. Keep this in mind as well. So too with our relationship with God, with Hashem. This is the reason Tishrei, the high holiday season, gives us these days of joy as well. The days of awe, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, represent the yearning for something greater. They, of course, peaked on Yom Kippur, a day which was totally beyond us, a day, a 25-hour period. We didn't eat, when we barely slept, and when we confined ourselves mostly to the synagogue. And in doing so, what was the purpose on Yom Kippur? We tried to free ourselves from the material aspects of life that keeps us from being uplifted. But then comes the second half of the month that begins on Wednesday evening, the holiday of Sukkot. The time has now come to integrate what we've just experienced in the high holiday season, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's now time to celebrate. So why are we celebrating? Because we came into the palace of the king and we passed his judgment. We're all now flush, filled with all the amazing blessings Hashem has given to us. Now we have left the palace and we are ready to begin to dance in the streets, so to speak. How do we do this? How do we integrate all the blessings of the days of awe and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and bring it into a reality of our life? Therefore we have now the essential component for these preparations, for the joy of Sukkot, is by building a sukkah. A sukkah is a hut with a roof of palm fronds, branches, reeds, or bamboo, in which we are commanded to dwell during the sukkah week. What's the significance of this mitzvah? While it might be nice to get together in this quaint setting with family and friends, have a party, camp out, if it isn't pouring, of course, is there really any personal relevance to us today in this strange mitzvah? I'd like to share with you a story that would amplify the importance of going into the sukkah and its lesson to all of us. The 18th, before we start this story, I'd like to encourage everyone watching us this evening. So first of all, welcome. Feel free to text us, send us a note, and we'll be happy to recognize you and your notes as we go through the program this evening. The story I share with you was the 18th century Hasidic master, the Maggid of Mezrich. And he gives one answer to this question of what is the relevance, what's the meaning of this mitzvah of Sukkah. And he gives the following story of about a wealthy man who comes to visit a great sage. And he's shocked to find that this great sage is living in a very sparsely furnished shack on the outskirts of the town. He's dismayed. He wants to help him. He offered to personally provide the Maggid with quarters, with a proper home befitting his stature. What do you think the Maggid responded? He said to this wealthy man, "Please describe the home that you live in." "Of course," he says, it's a mansion. And then he says, "Describe me the accommodations while you're traveling." And when he finished, the Maggid said to him, "I see that your accommodations while traveling on business are much more modest than the place you call home. It's the same with me. Someday you'll come to my true home and you will see how completely different it is." This, dear friends, is the mitzvah, the lesson of the sukkah. It reminds us that we really are just traveling in this material world. Our true home is not here. Our dwelling places, as beautiful as they may be, are not our true home, which is much more grand and beautiful than anything that money can buy or that we could even imagine in our lives. Another important aspect of the sukkah, it tells the truth. It brings us to an appreciation of something deeper in our lives. See, unlike our everyday environment, the sukkah doesn't tell us any lies. Let me explain. It reflects reality as it actually is. Its roof of a sukkah is simple. It's a canopy of leaves and branches open to the sky. Insubstantial in its physical structure, the sukkah invites us to abandon the illusion that physical things, the roof, can either protect or limit us. In addition to the sukkah being insubstantial, the sukkah is very temporary. This fact encourages us to step out of our limiting boundaries of a past and future-based perspective and to embrace the truly unlimited potential that's only available to us in the present. The sukkah calls us to truth. And as we listen to God's command, remembering the miracles with which we left Egypt and entered this, again, this insubstantial, impermanent, and intensely powerful embrace of the sukkah, we acknowledge the truth. We acknowledge it's not only with our minds, with our bodies as well. We let go of the illusion with which, life surrounds us, and we embrace the essence of what life truly is all about. The sukkah makes us vulnerable. But paradoxically, this vulnerability is our greatest power. We were vulnerable when we began our journey into exile. We will be vulnerable when we conclude it. But far from making us weak, this vulnerability allows us to embrace our ultimate source, our unique destiny. In letting go of our dependence on the physical, so much so during the week of Sukkot, on the roof, what are we doing? We're embracing our own true nature. We are partners in creation. We are divine beings made in the image of Hashem. And on another level, the prophets tell us that when, at the end of days, the Jewish nation will be threatened by powerful, hostile forces. This threat will be so great that our human strength will not be able to overcome it. At that point, the prophet tells us, we will at long last abandon the core illusions of creation. This elusive security of physical things will lose its power to deceive us. We will remember the truth. We will turn to Hashem wholeheartedly, and in doing so, will allow the divinity concealed within creation and within ourselves to shine forth in its fullest and best brightness. We will elicit the divine revelation and the protection that is our destiny. This is what Sukkot is really all about. So we move our lives into the Sukkah. We are doing far more than just fulfilling a commandment or commemorating, the past. On some essential level, we're living the future. By being in the Sukkah, we are embracing the reality, our true reality. We are embracing our destiny. We are embracing Hashem. Again, we recognize everyone who's joining us this evening, and at any time, and feel free to post a text and to chat with us during this program, and I'll be happy to monitor your thoughts and input during this time. Now there's another aspect to this holiday as well. The second most important component of our preparations for the joy of Sukkot is buying the acquisition of the Daled Minim, the 4 kinds. What are they? 3 myrtle branches, hadassim, 2 willow twigs, known as aravot, and 1 palm frond, better known as the lulav, and 1 citron, the esrog, which we bind together and we wave in 6 directions every day during the week of Sukkot, except for Shabbos. Now the Medrash tells us these 4 kinds correspond to 4 types of people. The esrog, which has both delicious taste and delightful aroma, represents the individual who both learns and achieves. The palm frond, the lulav, produces fruit that has taste but no aroma. This is the portrait of a scholar who shuns the world of action. He's very learned, but not too involved in action. Then we have the myrtle, which is fragrant. Hadassim is fragrant, but tasteless. This corresponds, says the Medrash, to the activist who's very involved in good deeds, and his good deeds, though, overshadow his scholarship. Then we have the willow, the arava, which is both tasteless and scentless. No smell, no taste. On a tam, on a reach. This represents a person who neither learns nor achieves, actualizing neither his intellectual potential nor his capacity to improve the world. On Sukkot, we take these 4 kinds and we bind them into one bundle, each an integral part of the community of God. They're all indispensable. Each one contributes to the other. We must ask ourselves during this holiday, which one are we? Are we to be compared to a lulav, to an esrog, hadassim, and arovas? King Solomon, who was mystified by the meaning of the four kinds, made the following observation, that the citron, which is the esrog, was a tormented fruit. What do I mean? It's a fruit, the only fruit that remains on the tree all year round. It's subjected to all the kinds of the climatic conditions, the summer, the fall, winter, the spring. But so too in life, we find that the greatest people are beset by all kinds of travail and challenges, and that the most balanced personality is forged by the constant need to adapt to new climates and the new environments. So the esrog represents someone who's able to live through all kinds of seasons and come out strong. That's the deeper side of an esrog. Let's look at the willow, explains King Solomon. The willow, as we explained, represents an individual has no smell and no taste, doesn't study too much, does not achieve too much, no action, so which is not openly exhibiting any positive qualities. Nevertheless, the willow grows in clumps by the river. In the same way, some people might not display any positive traits, but their roots are embedded in the banks of our ancestral river, nourished by the waters of their heritage. And that is the case of every single one of us. Observe that, look at the person alone. They may not yet express their virtues, but when you gather them in a community, their souls shine. And I clearly saw this, my dear friends, and I'm sure yourself, throughout the high holiday season in our synagogue at Chabad of Mineola, the souls shone. It came from all over, gathered together, and we all united. So while we do that unity and come together in the synagogue on the high holidays, comes the holiday of Sukkot, starting this tomorrow evening, Wednesday evening, and Thursday and Friday, and throughout the coming week. This is the time when we unite together, not only inside the shul, but in the regular weekdays aspect of our life, reminding ourselves of the vulnerability of our lives, to recognize the unity we all share with each other as we come together in the sukkah. I take a moment now to pause, to take a look, to say hello to Laura May. Thank you for joining us. It was wonderful to see your entire family. To thank you to Richard Ruttenberg and to everybody else joining us this evening. At this point, having expressed to you the lulav, the esrog, hadassim, and arovos, the Medrash also explains to us that they represent all parts of our body. The lulav represents the spine, the esrog represents the heart, the arova, the willow, represents the mouth, the lips, and the hadassim, which is the myrtle leaf, represents the eyes. As we take these four kinds together during the week of Sukkot, we're asking the Almighty God that all the blessings that you've given us on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur should be felt in a very real, physical way. To be able to stand tall, to be able to feel appropriately, to be able to see the right things and say the right things. What I'm now going to share with you comes from a well-known, she's known as the Kabbalah coach, Shimona Zukernik. She's creator of the method, a therapeutic application of Kabbalah. And she explains to us how these four kinds that we take on Sukkot and actually bring us closer to Hashem in a deeper sense. The Torah tells us, you shall take for yourselves on the first day of Sukkot the magnificent fruit of the tree, the leaf of a date palm, boughs from a plaited tree, and willows of the brook. That's the Torah words. And she explains, and I will share that with you, that as we sit in the sukkah, take into our hands the lulav, and we reach it up, and the esrog, the lulav and the hadassim and harovos, they actually represent the inculcation of the Almighty's love for each and every one of us. Let me try to explain. And I also say shalom to Barbara Flax and to everybody else. If you wish to jot us a note or a question or a comment, we'll be more than happy to address you during the program. So let's now take, you need to be a little visual now and image in your mind. You're now sitting in the sukkah. Its walls are panels of fragrant wood. On the floor beneath you dance patterns of light and shade cast by the schach, and that is the covering, the scented roof of leaves that are above your head. Take a deep breath. Imbibe the peace within your sukkah's walls. And when you're sitting in the sukkah, you'll feel that. Take a deep breath. You're in your sukkah. There's an atmosphere of peace, of serenity in that sukkah. The schach is a shadow cast by a heavenly tree. This is according to Kabbalah. The schach on top represents a very deep tree, a heavenly tree. It is ancient, wide, alive. And nestled within that, the inner branches of that tree, you notice a fruit. The citron is the esrog. What does this mean? It is the heart within the heart of the tree of life. And in that heart, with the heart of tree of life, it pulsates with Hashem's infinite love for each and every one of us. Continuing this imagery from Kabbalah, we now want to internalize this love. So we breathe in deeply. And when you breathe in, you feel your spine stretch and open. And if you think about this, when you breathe in, the shape, what you feel is the shape of a lulav. Your back, your spine stretches up. As I said beforehand, the lulav represents the spine of the body. Its pointed tip, the top of the lulav, tapers beyond you. It's higher, it's taller than your head. It transcends your rational mind, reaching above you, beyond the schach, into the heart of the tree. Feel the point quiver as the lulav now and the esrog make contact. God's love begins to flow down your lulav spine, downward, between your shoulders, the blades, down to its base. Suddenly now, this love begins to rise, because it now reached down to the bottom of the lulav, which is the spine, comes up, and reaches back to your heart. Look inward, and you will see that the ventricles of a person's heart, those corners that we reserve for love and hatred and forgiveness and grudges, abundance and stinginess, we now surrender that to the higher being, to the deeper side of our personality. And it continues. The love of the lulav penetrates one's heart. It wakens us up to a higher self. It allows us to go to the pockets of our darkness, to use it in defense of our eagerness, and the darkness gives way to light and love. This is how Kabbalah explains the actual movement. When we take the lulav, we lift it up beyond ourselves. That's our spine reaching up into the schach, into the tree of knowledge, where that esrog, representing God's love for every one of us, is there. We touch that, we bring it back. And as you know, in tradition, when we take the lulav and the esrog, we lift it up, we did it down, sideways. It's bringing this holiness and recognition of God to all part of ourselves. And as it moves up, we actually have affected our heart as the esrog. The heart has become one whole. It's now a heart or an esrog pulsating with love for our God, for the godly spark within our soul and for the world. And suddenly joy surfaces in our whole personality. That's why Sukkot is called the time of our great celebration of joy. Doesn't end there. The love and the joy flows outwards, filling our lungs. It rises up towards our mouth. Our lips are the shape of the willow leaf. Silent leaves fluttering on the wings of love and joy. You have no need to speak. Simply being bespeaks the loftiness of one's soul. So we've had the spine impacted, bring it up into our heart, up into our mouth, and the energy now flows it upwards as well, entering our eyes, seeping into the center of our forehead. Illuminated myrtle eyes, as we explained that the myrtle represents the eyes. And at that point we take a moment to envision our life through the lens of this amazing joy. We observe the way we waken in the morning, the way we interact with others, the way we pray and play. Our whole life becomes differently. The whole purpose of Sukkot is to bring all this joy into our personality and totally changing the way our mornings, our afternoon, our interaction with others, and the way, as I say, to pray and to play. So here's the question. We're going to pause and address Laura May's question. She says, Rabbi, why do we use a bitter fruit when we associate it with love? Sometimes the love comes through bitterness. Sometimes we have to learn to appreciate each other through our own, limitations, and then it comes out. And as we say many times in Jewish thinking, Yisna Orim and Achosha, the greater the light is appreciated that comes out of darkness. So, with the days of Sukkot coming up, sit in your sukkah with the esrog, the lulav, the dasim aravas, and think about this. You're in a circle of love. You are a bouquet of joy. So while the sukkah represents an all-inclusive, all-embracing unity in love, it's now become individualized through the specific role of that connection that we have to God through our spine, the lulav, through our heart, the esrog, through the hadassim, which is the eyes, and the aravas, which is the mouth. We speak differently, we see differently, we feel differently, and we stand tall and proud and appreciative of all that we have. Let us continue. I'd like to tell you a story that goes back to the 1700s that happened with Rabbi Pinchas Shapiro of Koretz. He was considered two of the most preeminent followers of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. He was a very spiritual giant in his generation. The reason why I'm telling you the story, dear friends, is because it speaks of the importance of the broader picture. We can celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and be very much moved and uplifted, but then the real test is in the days and months and years ahead. To be able to inculcate, to integrate everything into our lives. And here's a story of this great Rabbi Pinchas. His greatness was in the beginning unknown, but he had no regrets because it suited him fine. He spent his days and nights in Torah study, prayer, meditation, and he wasn't interrupted. But as he became known, the word began to spread that this Rabbi Pinchas was a very special individual. People began to visit him on a regular basis, seeking his guidance, requesting his support, asking for prayers and beseeching his blessings. And the more he helped them, and the more they came. And the trickle to his door became a stream, and the stream became a daily flood of so many people with their personal stories and requests for help from him. So Rabbi Pinchas, this rabbi, was overwhelmed. He felt he had no more time to serve God properly, because he no longer had sufficient time to study, to pray, to meditate the way he should. He didn't know what to do. He needed more privacy and less distraction. But how could he turn away dozens, even hundreds of people who genuinely needed his help? How could he convince them to go elsewhere, to others more willing and more qualified than himself? Then he had an idea. He would pray to God for help. And he asked, let God arrange that the people not be attracted to him and not seek him out. Let God make him despicable in the eyes of his fellows. Well, the Talmud tells us, a tzaddik decrees and heaven agrees. Rab Pinchas prayed, so it became. So no longer did people visit him. Not only that, on those occasions when he went to town, he was met with, with averted heads and a very chilly kind of atmosphere. Nobody looked at him anymore. He didn't mind this. He was delighted. The old pattern was restored. His life wasn't interrupted anymore. He could sit and study all day. Then Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur passed. And they remained these 4 brief days, busy days, preparing for Sukkot, like we're doing right now. And in previous years, there was always some yeshiva students or local townspeople who were only too glad to help the pious rabbi put up his sukkah. But this time, nobody came. No one liked him, and no one even thought of helping him. Not being very handy in these matters, the rabbi didn't know what to do. Finally, having no choice, he had to go and hire somebody to build a sukkah for him. But the man did not possess even the tools that were needed. And Rabbi Pinchas couldn't get a single Jew in the town, in the neighborhood, to lend him tools because they disliked him so much. In the end, his wife had to go to borrow them, and even that was difficult to accomplish because of this prevailing attitude towards her husband. With just a few hours remaining till the onset of the festival of Sukkot, they finally managed to complete a flimsy, minimal little structure. As the sun slid between the forest branches and the Rebbetzin lit the festival candles, Rab Pinchas hurried to shul. Despite his solitary kind of ways, he always made a point of attending synagogue on the holidays. Besides, he didn't want to miss out on bringing a guest for the festival meal, something that's so integral to the holiday. The essence of the holiday of Sukkot is to have guests in the sukkah. Now, in those days in Europe, people desired, if they wanted to be invited, what would they do? They would stand at the back of the shul, and when the service is concluded, the balabatim, the householders, would invite those people on the way out. They were very happy to be able to accomplish this mitzvah. So this Rabbi Pinchas, unfortunately, didn't find it so simple. Even those without a place to eat, and desperate for an invitation to the sukkah, to enjoy a good festival meal, turned him down without even a second thought. Nobody liked him anymore. This is what he prayed for. Eventually, everyone who needed a place and everyone who wanted a guest was satisfied, except for this tzaddik, Rab Pinchas. Not one single person would come home to be with him as a guest. So he trudged home alone, saddened and a bit shaken by this realization that he may not have another guest, not even for the special festival meal on the first night of Sukkot. And but this too was part of the price of his freedom. He had prayed to be left alone. So he said to himself, well, it was worth it, wasn't it? At least nobody was bothering him anymore. He could sit and study Torah all day. Pausing just inside the entrance of his sukkah, Rab Pinchas began to chant the traditional invitation to the Ishpizin. Each night of Sukkot, we recognize that each day another guest comes, spiritual guest. They're called the 7 shepherds, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and there's Joseph, Moshe, Aaron, King David. And they all come. They come to the sukkah, led each night by that particular night's special guest. So on the first night, the Ushpizin, the guest, the heavenly guests, visit every Jewish sukkah. So although most are not privileged to actually see these exalted visitors, but Rab Pinchas was definitely one of those select few who actually could experience this. They could actually see, such holy people could actually see Avraham, Abraham right there in the sukkah. This year he raised his eyes and saw the patriarch Abraham, the first of these Ushpizin, and therefore the honored guests for the first night of the festival. But what did he find? He found that Abraham was standing outside the door of the sukkah, keeping his distance. Abraham wouldn't come into his sukkah. Pinchas cries out to him, Avram, Abraham, Father Abraham, Avram Avinu, why don't you enter my sukkah? What's wrong? What did I do wrong? Why aren't you coming in like you did all the other years? And Avram, Abraham, replied, I am the embodiment of chesed, serving God through deeds of loving kindness. Hospitality is my specialty, but I will not join a table where there are no guests. There has to be together with these heavenly guests, there has to be the physical guests. The crestfallen Rabbi Pinchas, quickly reoriented his priorities. He realized he'd made a mistake. He prayed that everything should be restored to him as it had been, that he should find favor in the eyes of his fellows exactly as before. And again his prayer was answered. Within a short period of time, throngs of people were again finding their way to his door, seeking his guidance, asking his support, requesting his prayers, beseeching his blessings. No longer could he be devoted all or even most of his time to Torah study, his prayer or his meditation. But thanks to his holy sukkah guest, Abraham, this was no longer seen as a problem. I share this story with you because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's being able to impact the world around us and making it appropriate for us to impact the world in a very, 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 very special way. And as much as we've had our experiences on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the real test comes in how we are able to integrate it out of the synagogue. Most of the year is not spent in the synagogue. It's out of there, out in the marketplace, at our homes, place of business, and to be able to integrate that with our lives ahead. I want to thank any other questions this evening. And as Barbara Flax points out on our bulletin board, you taught the most beautiful decoration of the sukkah are the guests who are welcomed inside. In fact, the Chabad custom is not so much to put any decorations, any fruits or all kinds of things that we have out there. And the reason why you will not find any decorations in the Chabad sukkah, although if that's your custom, please continue that. But in the Chabad custom is the beauty of the sukkah is the people there, the guests, the sharing with people, sharing the holiday spirit, singing together, sharing the food, uplifting ourselves, and gathering the importance of the joy of Sukkot as we go forward into our life and to the days and the months ahead. This is your host, Rabbi Pearl, thanking you, wishing you all the best, a very good Yontif, of Sukkot, and then of course into Hoshana Rabbah, Shemini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, and thanking you again for joining us. As noted, will be archived for your convenience. Please spread the word. We're heard here every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Thank you. This is Rabbi Pearl wishing you a good Yontif. Thank you.